Welcome back, guys. I got something a little different for you today. I'm going to show you how to wire your car in a way that probably will be the last time you have to worry about tapping into any of your car circuitry. So as you add gauges or other components to your car, this system through Painless, it's called the Cirkit Boss. It's a 7-circuit relay-based pre-wired system. I'm going to show you how to wire this step by step. Now for my video, I'm obviously doing a Foxbody Mustang. That's what my channel is based on for those following my build. I'm doing this at this point in my build because I'm actually waiting on some bolts to show up in the mail. And so I figured I'd go ahead and get this done. So as I go through the various projects, I'll be able to refer to this video, show you guys how I did this. And the nice thing about this, what I'm going to show you doesn't apply just to a Foxbody Mustang. It actually applies to virtually any vehicle that you have. As long as you have a power source and you have a way to get the trigger wire, you don't need to hack up anything in your wiring. So this applies to any vehicle. So things like dash cameras, transmission temperature gauges, things that guys like to typically add. This is a great little system. I'm going to kind of walk you through what this is before we get into the how-to. So what this fuse block gives you is it actually gives you 7 circuits, and they're relay based. Just to be more precise, 4 of them are relay based, 3 of them are going to be constant, so they're going to bring in power directly from your battery, and so you'll have 3 of those. So for things like your horn or your lights, things that can be on while the ignition is not turned on, that's what they are, courtesy lights or door locks, things like that. That's what those are going to be for. And then the other 4 circuits are for your accessories, things that are ignition based. Obviously, you probably don't want your gauges on when the ignition is turned off. So these are 20 amp circuits, but you don't have to use all 20 amp circuits. It is a fused relay, which is nice because they have this all wired, and they're very well labeled. It actually, if you look at each wire, it will tell you. I'll try and do this for the camera. They're color coded, constant hot. Hot ignition. So you'll see our accessory for it tells you what each circuit is. So I don't think you could, for what you pay for this, obviously they have enough wire that they can probably do this cheaper, but if you were to go out and buy each one of these color coded and put this all together in relays, you probably are going to be more money than what you spent doing this, or you're going to have your own relay and then wire this in a little distribution block, another way to do it. But this is a very nice system. And then, in the old Billy Mays, but wait, there's more. The nice thing about this, you can use fuse taps. So it's 7 circuits, but it actually can be more. If you use one of these ATA circuits, you can actually take one of these. And so, like in my case, I have a whole bunch of gauges, fuel pressure, boost gauge, etc. So I'm not going to use 20 amp. I'm going to pull these out. But you basically can tap into this circuit, so you basically can double these. So at this point, you actually have 8 accessory circuits, and you could have 6 constants. Obviously, that assumes that you are not. If you need the full 20 amps, you can do something with like a 1 to 3 amp. I would add on to that, but something like that's a heavy duty load, like maybe a blower motor or something like that. Maybe you don't want to split this. But in my case, I'm going to have 2 5 amps going to 2 gauges. So ultimately, it can be up to 14 things connected to this. And the good thing is, once you wire it into the battery and you have the trigger wire, you're done. You pretty much don't ever have to worry. You can just tuck these up. Anything that you're not currently using, you can just tuck up under the dash, put some zip ties in there, and for future use. So it is a very nice system. Okay, so with that, I'm going to show you how I'm going to install mine in my Foxbody. Okay, here we are under the dash. And the first thing you'll need to do with your block is decide where you're going to mount it. So you could, on a Foxbody, mount it underneath the starter solenoid. Just looking around here, what I think I'm going to do is there's this metal bar here. And I'm actually going to cut a piece of 24 gauge metal. And I'm kind of make my own little bracket and then have 2 bolts. I'll drill some holes here. So then I have a nice mounting block or mounting plate to hold the block here. So I still have good access. I'm not in the way of any of my pedals or anything else. So I think that's probably about as good a location with that. And with that, I'm going to show you what little bracket I'm going to make. Okay guys, I'm doing this a simple way. After all, this channel is called Mr. Stang Dog. This is not Bob Ross here. So the way I'm going to do this has two pads, because you got the wires that are underneath the fuse block, and you've got it underneath the relay. So it's got a block here so that as you route the wires, basically it clearances the wires coming through. I'm going to just take my Sharpie, and initially what I'm going to do, I'm literally just going to eyeball this guy. So I can just zip this across. The other thing is, if you don't have one of these, not everybody's going to have one of these, so you can just take a cut-off wheel and just zip along. This is, I think, a 24 gauge. So this is my initial block. So now I'm going to go up under the car. I'm going to put it under there, and I'm going to check where that bracket is so it clearances it, and then I'll come right back and I'll show you what I have. All I did is I took this plate up underneath. I eyeballed about to get the final length that I needed, and then where that bolt is, where it mounts to the steering column, I just need to notch this corner out. Okay, for those who aren't visual and want me to give you a little bit of idea how this is going to mount. So this is going to be attached up to that bracket, and then the relay and the fuse block is going to be mounted to this, and I'll be using this little flange portion of it. I'll be drilling some holes through here, and I will bolt this. So one of the other things I'm going to do while I'm here, just because it's easier to do it this way, is I'm actually going to take a drill and just mark my holes. Okay, so just showing you the progress on the fabrication. So this bracket is going to be attached to the car. I've drilled 2 holes to fit 2 number 8 bolts, but because this does use a ground, and this is an important ground, and I just wanted the rigidity, so it's going to look like this, and this will be bolted up here. So I do apologize, you know, there's a little bit of fabrication here, but again, this is for the Foxbody portion of it, and I want the focus to be on the wiring. We'll get there soon enough. If you do have a place on your firewall or anywhere underneath the car and you can just bolt it right down, you can skip doing any of this kind of stuff. Guys, here's kind of the final version of my fabrication. Okay, so you can see we're going to bolt this guy up. Okay, now she's in. You can see what I've done here. The other things I did is I took and I think I have it in a little time lapse, is I just rounded off the edges, and then I just kind of cleaned everything up on the edges to make them nice and smooth, so these aren't sharp at all. So this fuse, this 3 amp fuse, is for the trigger. The 3 circuits here are for the constants, and then the 4 circuits here are for the switch to off the ignition. So now we're going to go outside the car. I'm going to show you actually how to wire it. While we're here, I just do want to mention this because you're going to see this outside the car. Now, I've actually put the braided loom on top of this, but this is the 10 gauge wire that is going to go to the battery. So you can see what I've done. I've already put the braided loom on it, and I've directed it out of the car. Now, in my case, I'll show you back on the other side where it comes out, but I'm basically exiting where the cruise control of my Foxbody used to go. If that's still in use, you'll just need to find another hole. Another common place to poke through is in this, you can see this little seal here going out the steering shaft. You can just poke a hole right through that guy and then go out that way. Okay, you can see where I've popped this out. Now this is where the cruise control would normally go on a Foxbody Mustang. I will actually be stuffing a grommet back inside of there. I won't leave it like that. Okay, so this is where that 8 gauge wire comes out. I didn't terminate this yet, so I am using the heat shrink. You can see I've already used the butt connector on here. Now do be aware there are different size butt connectors. I mention this because if you get too far ahead of yourself and you don't realize it, you can see this is the large ring, and I'll kind of put these side by side. These ring terminals are actually provided with a kit. You can see there's a small eyelet and a large eyelet. Make sure when you're doing these that you realize what they're going to go to, and I'll explain that as I'm explaining the wire. It'll make sense to you what I'm talking about. Okay, so that 8-gauge wire that comes out from the car from that relay is actually going to go through this auto reset breaker. So do not direct wire your relay, your power source, directly from the battery without going through this breaker. If for some reason something shorts out with that wire, you basically got a direct feed from the battery. All kinds of badness can happen with that. So you are going to have a power source that goes from the battery to the breaker. So battery to breaker. And then again from the breaker to the wire that goes back into the car. Okay. So now you can see what I'm talking about. You want to make sure that you have the small eyelets for the wire sides that are going to go to your breaker. Now, as far as wiring up the breaker, it's not universal. You can't just swap it around. In this case, the one that's provided with the kit, you can see going from the battery to the breaker, it's going to be on the copper lug. And just for anybody that has ever done this before, you can actually see, and hopefully this shows up in the camera, you can see where it actually says BAT for battery. So your battery side is going to go on the copper lug. Now, when I'm doing this, just make sure that you actually put on this little protective covering first, otherwise you get to take it off again. So in terms of mounting location, I popped 2 holes down underneath where the starter relay is, and it's a good location for it. And then I'm just using 2 self-tapping screws to put that in, and it's a perfect location. And this is all good. So all of this is going to be hidden underneath. I've got a Moroso aluminum cover that's going to be going over this. So I used some braided wiring loom. I actually had to use a couple self-tapping screws that I use for attaching the small breaker that's provided with the kit. And then I also added some heat shrink tubing because with the braided loom that I'm using, I just needed a way to nicely terminate the ends of this. Now, depending on the vehicle, this might change, but on a Foxbody Mustang, you really don't need any more wire. This is actually, I actually cut this off. I've had multiple feet, probably a good 3 feet or more. At a minimum, you want to remove and make sure it's not touching anything metal, your negative battery terminal. It's actually not even a bad idea to take the positive terminal off, just in case it absolutely hits up against something. Now I'm just using a little butane torch for my heat shrink. And you don't want to go too crazy on this because you can melt it, especially the braided loom. So I mentioned about the extra wire, and I talked previously about the breaker, which I have mounted down below here. Let me just give you a quick picture of that. Okay guys, so I mentioned about that copper lug on that breaker needing to go to the battery. So the power from the battery needs to go from the battery down to the breaker. On a Foxbody Mustang, you can do that, by the way. I could actually go take this lug and take my battery terminal. And like in my case, I'm actually using something that looks like this. So if I wanted to, I could just, I could attach here. Just trying to keep things clean, off the battery, keep everything behind the cover. I'm actually going to go from the lug on my starter relay, which is here. So on a Mustang, on an 87 and 93 Mustang, it's going to go from the battery cable, and this terminal is actually going to go on this lug right here. If you have an aftermarket starter relay, this is the wrong place to buy aftermarket. Stick with the Motorcraft one. If you look at the length, this is actually an aftermarket one. I actually just have as a backup in my parts box. You can see the lug on this thing is not very long. And when you start adding a lot of stuff to your starter relay, because that power terminal gets used for quite a few things, you will run out of room. Okay, so now that we've discussed the starter relay, what I'm going to be doing, since this is actually the same as my positive battery terminal, I'm actually going to use this big lug. I'm going to connect here, and then I'm going to connect down to the copper side of the breaker. So at this point, it's basically directly going through this terminal lug right down to the breaker. And then on the other side, the piece that I just completed, this is the part that goes back into the car. So this will connect to the basically the load side, or that silver lug, and I'll take a picture and I'll put that picture up here for you, see what this looks like. Okay, so now we need to find a suitable location to connect our trigger wire. Now this trigger wire, you don't want this on all the time. You only want it when the ignition is turned on. So the way you want to do this is, again, this is a Foxbody Mustang. So I am looking at the circuits, and what you want to do is, some of them it's obvious that it's probably, in the case of like a Mustang, these are older type fuses. Some cases it's quite obvious, like for example the horn circuit is going to be on, or the circuit that goes to your rear brake when you push on the brake, even with the car with the switch not turned on or the ignition turned on. You can still activate those circuits. Other things like the radio, the heater fan, things like that that only come on when you turn on the ignition. That's what we're looking for here. Now I kind of know already. There's actually a circuit. It's actually circuit 6. I'll show that here. I just happen to know this one. I've actually used this one previously. Now the trick here is this is actually an ignition only, and I'm going to demonstrate this for you. Okay guys, I'm going to go ahead and pop out this fuse. So I have the ignition on, and this is fuse 6, so you can see what I'm doing here. And then I have my digital multimeter, and I'm trying to do this with one hand, so I think you guys actually could be kind of impressed. You see here I have 12 volts. Now if I come to the other side of this, you'll see I'm reading ground. Basically reading 0 volts. So now I know that this is the hot side. This is important. And now I'll show you what we do for the next step. Okay, so now you want to take, there's a little clip. There's actually 3 of them in the kit. It's going to be based on the size of your fuse or the type of your fuse. Now mine are the old style ATC fuses, kind of the traditional size. There's also a clip for the mini, and there's even a kind for the barrel, the round glass kind. Now if you remember, so I got this little clip on here. So what's going to happen is my trigger wire is going to attach to this. So what we're going to do in circuit 6, we wanted the hot side. We already found that just now. And we want to push this guy in here. So now this is connected to the fuse. And now we're going to make our connection here. And this is going to be our trigger wire power. So I have, just to kind of get ahead, I've actually put on some of the loom. And then now what I've done is I've gone ahead and put on the connector. Now this isn't actually the one that was provided. The one that was provided, I dropped into the car and kicked it. So you can laugh at me for that. Anyways, this is one of the little blue spade connectors. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to connect him. Okay, so I've gone ahead and connected this. Okay, so at this point we're powered up. If you take your voltmeter and you take it to the constant wires, you'd see that there's 12 volts. And then when you turn the ignition on, you would see that all of them are powered up. But just be aware that these are live, so whenever you have the battery connected, so just be sensitive to that. Don't just chuck it in there and have it connecting directly to metal. You'll probably pop the fuse. So I want to make sure that I cover something that's actually important. While I was here, I was thinking about this. This 30 amp fuse goes to your blower motor, heating and air conditioning blower motor. So if you are going to select circuits in here that you want to go and use as your trigger wire, or just wiring in general, especially sensitive electronics, this probably isn't a good choice. So you want to probably look for things with 15 and 20 amp, because it takes less than an amp, I think like a half or 0.7 amps, somewhere around there, to actually power the trigger wire. But that's really not so much the issue, as much as if this thing blows. Remember, fuses are not instantaneous. There is a finite amount of time it takes to blow. And if that heater blower motor decides to let loose, and it's a wire, so it's an inductor. And so in that instantaneous amount of time, it can actually, if that thing lets go and blows up, or it shorts itself out, that inductance can kick wire back through the circuit. So you don't really want sensitive wiring. Now a relay trigger wire is not that big a deal, but just in general, that's probably something that I wouldn't really want to tap into. So I hope this helped you out on the install of the Painless Performance Cirkit Boss. This is actually a pretty handy thing. Simplifies your wiring. I hope you found this helpful. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.